Hello, and welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about a few things regarding items, and we won't make it too long, but just what I hope to teach you in this video is mostly how to evaluate items and how to come up with your own builds, your own play styles, your own whatever, and also how to better play around the items that you do choose to play with, right? So if we get right into it, we can use a very simple example of an item that is just a good item, just considered good by everyone, right? What is good about this item? Pretty much everything. So Noon Quiver. So it has a fine cost, it has a good build path, it has a good gold value, it has good effects, good stats, good everything, right? So this item is just great. So a few of the things that I just mentioned, right, are things that we want to think about with other items when we think about those, whether those items be AD or AP or tank or whatever. So firstly, we want to think about the power at completion, right? So when we complete the item, right, how hard do we spike? What do we really get here? We get some AD, some attack speed. Okay, could we get this otherwise? Kinda, pretty much. If we bought something like a pickaxe and a dagger, we would spend a bit less gold than this, but we would have almost these stats. We would have, I think, 12%, right? Yes, 12% attack speed, and we would have 25 AD, so we're pretty close to this. But we would also not have this, which is a pushing power passive. So when we finish this item, it's pretty good. But with components, you usually won't see a big spike in finishing power, but you'll rather see a big spike in finishing power when you actually buy a full item. So what do I mean here? Items like Kraken Slayer, right? So if we look at just the stats, okay, it's almost efficient. We, after Noon Quiver, paid like 1.7k gold to get another 10 AD, another 15% attack speed, and some crit chance. That's not really worth it, right? Because if we just bought another Noon Quiver, we would get another 30 AD and another 15% attack speed, so we would have a total of 60 AD with 30% attack speed for a lower cost. That is probably better than whatever this is, right? But at the same time, we would not get this, which is the passive. I think a better example of this, though, is something like Gale Force. Right, I can type. So Gale Force is a great example, right? I hate ads. We have 40 AD from this item. We have pretty much these stats from Zeal. Like if you look, 15% attack speed, 15% crit chance, 5% move speed. So literally, these stats are almost in the Zeal, and this stat is almost in the BF Sword. So if we just buy these two items, we spend 2.4k, right? And we got like 90% of these stats. But what we do get when we finish this item is the power at completion. So we get a huge dash, huge damage, huge everything, right? And for the record, the stats on this item are not so bad, actually. The stats are pretty gold efficient, so pretty cool. This is why this is a pretty good item as well. Same thing comes from something like Rabadons, right? You buy Rabadons, okay, we paid like this and that, but then when we completed the item, we got this power spike, right? So that's what we were thinking about in terms of when we complete the item. What do we really get? Do we power spike really hard? And why don't we actually go Rabadon's first item in most jumps? Well, because when you complete this item, you're not actually getting that much. You're realistically getting like 200 AP if you rush this item. So in the end, you're not getting a huge spike. That's why people go for items to give a huge spike on one item, and also that build well. This item also has other issues, which we'll get to soon. Okay, then power while building an item, okay? So how much power do we actually have while building an item? And this is different from the thing that people usually reference, which is build path. So with something like Rabadon's, which is a great example of this, while we build the item, we have perfectly reasonable power. It's not really an issue. We're buying needlessly large rods. These items are more than 100% gold efficient. Same thing if we buy something like Bloodthirster, we would see that this item builds out a BF sword. If we just stack BF swords, like that's perfectly reasonable, right? Like, this item is more than gold efficient. We're getting 40 AD every time. For example, if we play something like Draven or whatever, or if we play Evelyn and we buy BF sword, needlessly large rods or whatever. Either way, if we're using AP well on our champ, so if we have a good AP ratio or a good AD ratio or whatever, these items are great, right? Like we buy 2 of these, we only spent 2600, but we got 80 AD. We can't get that with any completed item, right? No completed item will give us 80 AD for 2600 gold. That's insane, because all we're buying is raw AD. So the power we do get from buying the components is quite good here. Whereas some items have an issue where when you're buying the components, you don't really get a lot of power. So let's think of something like this. These Caulfield items have this issue usually. So these items are a great example. When we buy Caulfield, a lot of champs that buy this shit don't get a lot of value from it. Specifically ADCs and stuff. So if you're thinking of buying this on Lucian, on Ezreal, and so on, when you're buying this, this is not a satisfying item to buy because it does not give you shit for power. It gives you 10 ability haste and 25 AD. The AD value is too low because compare this to something like Dirk, which gives you more AD while also giving you pen. So if you look at Dirk, 30 AD and it gives you pen. This is just going to give you infinitely more damage in pretty much every fight. I mean, Dirk is also known to be a really strong item for a long time already. So, I mean, it makes sense that it's good compared to something like this. And then these items are also great as examples because they present the issue of power at completion pretty well. So which of these items do people rush, right? So stuff like this, this could be rushed, like this one, sometimes this one, sometimes this one, sometimes this one, right? Maybe sometimes, like, I mean, Prowlers is like changed now, so not really. So what do we see here, really? A lot of these items on their own don't have a good power at completion. So like Manamune has like no power when it's completed, unless you actually have the tier stacked, because it doesn't do anything. It just gives you a bunch of AD, but as I said, it just doesn't do anything. You're spending a decent amount of gold, but really you're just getting less value than if you just bought like 2 BF swords, realistically. Navori, same thing, like it just doesn't give you a lot when you buy it first because you don't have enough attack speed to utilize the passive, and yet you don't get that much damage from it, and you don't have enough crit chance for it to make your spells really hurt, so it just doesn't really have an identity. Prowler is just not really built first. Like Cyrilda is an item that just won't give you a lot of damage in the early game because people have 50 armor. So if you're penetrating 15 armor while buying an item that costs 3.2k and yet only getting 45 AD, ability haste, and some armor pen, that's gonna be pretty bad, right? You're not really gonna want that. So Axiom is different, but okay. So we have a few examples of these things, I suppose. Then we have scaling after completion of the item, right? So some items are pretty good when you complete them, but pretty bad afterwards, okay? So a lot of you probably play Evelynn, so I'll just use this as an example. So Shadow Flame is pretty decent on Evelynn, especially when you complete it. Especially if you went at like first or second or something, it's pretty decent, right? It doesn't really fall behind in damage that much. Sometimes it's even better in damage than other stuff. And if you buy this before Rocket Belt, then it'll even oftentimes do more damage. But what's the issue with this item? It just doesn't scale into anything. You compare this to Rocket Belt, right? So let's just write it down, okay? 100 AP and 10 to 20 pen. That's like our damage stats, right? And then we compare this to Rocket Belt. So now we have minus 10 AP. Okay. That's fine. We have a bit less AP. We do have ability haste on top, but okay, let's even ignore that. 6 magic pen. But then every time we buy a legendary item, we get another 5. And because we buy Magi most of the time, we're gonna do like +1 to -9, right? Like, or -9, like one of these. On the pen when we just buy this item. But then we get an active, we get some ability haste, okay. So we can see how this item will end up being slightly less damage at some points, especially if you rush both of the items, right? But then what happens when we keep buying more items, right? It's suddenly, if you have like 2-3 legendary items, this item is giving 20 pen permanently without any conditions and anything else. So it just completely outclasses an item like Shadowflame. A great example of this stuff is also like all the crit items, right? So if we go back to Kraken. The fuck? That's not what I wanted. If we go back to Kraken, right? So ADCs have this as a very general theme that always is present. So AD, attack speed, and crit chance, right? The holy trinity of ADC usually. What does this really represent? It's just a multiplier, right? Each one of these multiplies the other. So we have a 100% AD ratio, right? We have a 100% AD ratio multiplied by the attack speed that we have. So 1 attack speed, let's say, multiplied by, well, the crit chance, right? And if we crit, then that gives us extra damage. I believe that the crit that they made is now 175% damage, but let's just count it as 200% because it's easier to calculate. So let's say that every 5th auto attack with this is 200%, right? Which means that we're just getting an extra 20% damage, I believe. It should be like that. Yes, I think it is. So basically every auto attack on average gets an extra 20% damage. I don't know why it doesn't work like this instead of this lottery system, but that's just the way Riot Games likes it. I guess a bit of RNG is fun for people, I don't know. Now, if we keep multiplying this, right, if we just buy crit chance, this won't really do that much for us. Like, it'll double our damage eventually, but it won't really be worth it, right? Same thing with attack speed. If we just keep buying attack speed, it'll double our damage eventually, but it won't really be worth it. And the same thing with AD. If we keep buying AD, eventually it'll double. But what if we just buy like 30 extra AD, right? And then we buy like 0.3 extra attack speed. And then we buy another, I don't know, 20% crit. So now with this, we arrived at a slightly different result, right? Though this is not exactly something you should multiply. This should not be a multiply. This should be an addition, but you should be adding on this multiplied by this. But to keep it simple, we'll just write it down like this, right? So now your DPS is 130, and then you're doing 1.3 attacks per second, so you're actually getting this DPS, and then we can add an extra 40% on that. So if we do like a 0.4 here, we're getting this, right? And we add this to 169, which is our damage before, and suddenly we are on 236. But if we just doubled any of these, we would get only to 200. That's pretty good, right? And this is why items in League tend to scale. Same thing happens with HP and armor and MR. Same thing and like the flat resistances that you get and whatever else from like Frozen Heart, from Randuin's and so on. The same thing happens with the AP stats, where you have AP and then you have CDR and then you have like Rabadon's passive, which multiplies the AP, and then like Pen or whatever, I don't know. Whatever you want to talk about or you think about. AD champs have the most of this because, as I said here, you have attack speed, attack damage, crit chance, you have armor pen, you have lethality, you sometimes have like on hits or whatever, so there's quite a bit you can calculate with AD champions. If you're just thinking of it this way. So with this, you also find out, okay, well, some items are going to be really good at providing value after we've completed them and providing a scaling value, right? So if we buy something like Kraken and Infinity together, usually it was a good value because you got attack speed here and, okay, some AD or whatever. But okay, let's look at a more general example that people usually use, right? So something like Phantom Dancer, a bit of AD, but a lot of attack speed. So 30% here, 30% here. So we have 60% attack speed on this item while having crit chance as well. Then you pair this with Infinity. What does Infinity Edge give? Right? Very simple. High AD, some crit chance, and crit strike damage. So with this combination, you ended up really wanting attack speed here, right? And PD was pretty much the best item to give you attack speed. So if you combine these two items, you become really strong. And that's kind of the general idea of scaling of items in League of Legends. If we go a bit further than that, though, we have practicality of the builds. So how practical are these builds? Why do people always build stuff like Collector? People are always so mad. Collector, Collector, Collector. Why do people build Collector? What the fuck? Why do people build Collector? It's so bad, bro. I hate Collector. Okay, well, very simple. Because this item makes you very strong when you buy Serrated Dirk. It's very simple to buy these components. And when you finish it, you are still not unhappy. You also spike at every single point when you're buying this item. So if you spike at every point while you buy the item, the build is very practical. And you're really strong at every point. If you buy this item something like second, then you're always spiking. If you buy this item first, you're always spiking. You can't buy items that don't spike first and second, because then at some point you're just weaker. Let's say that you buy something like, let's go Gale Force, right? Okay, let's go Gale Force, and let's say you didn't get enough gold for BF Sword, which is why people don't usually go Gale Force first right now. If you do get enough gold for BF Sword, it's perfectly fine, but if you don't get it, then you're now buying Longsword and Zeal. If you buy these items and you play against a decent player, he will fight you. Why? Because you have no stats. You're useless. Because if you look at the cost analysis of this, 400 of your gold is spent on move speed. Okay? And some of your gold is spent on crit strike chance. If you have 100 AD and you have 1 attack speed, getting 15% crit strike chance is not gonna do so much for you. Because really, all you're getting here is 15 damage. But realistically, you could just buy 15 AD or something, right? Okay, you have 15% attack speed here, so maybe you have a bit more attack speed, but you probably don't. You probably still have 1 or less attack speed. And you're critting only once in like 8 auto attacks or something. So that's not that nice. If you crit a lot, sure, but it's just not that nice. Especially because the game is quite bursty, so you try to finish off someone before they really get into the most extended fight and you hope for a crit or something. Like, you don't really want to play for that. Especially because it doesn't exactly work the way that they described it, because they nerfed the critical strike damage, I believe, from 200% to 175%. So it's actually worse than what I described, because what I said would be a DPS increase, which aligns with the crit strike chance you bought, but in reality, you're really getting only like 10 DPS or something, which means that if you buy a longsword, you just get more. But you paid more than a longsword for that crit chance, which is just abysmal. Okay. I mean, if we look at how much you actually paid for this crit strike chance, it's 600 gold. Not good, not good. Not worth it at that point in the game. So you can see that practically, these items just don't make sense. While some other items can make a lot of sense, like BF Sword is fine, but it's just hard to buy. So items have a lot of drawbacks, but not all items have drawbacks. That's why some items are just really good and people always buy them. But the problem is that not all champions can use these items. So if you look at an item that doesn't have drawbacks, it's something like Serrated Dirk. So are you powerful when you complete this item? Yes. Do you have a lot of power when you're building this item? Yes, you're perfectly fine. You're buying longswords, so you're not getting wronged in any way. And then you're also getting to buy items at a cheap price. So you're not buying expensive components at any time. Really good. Are you scaling after you complete the item? Yes, you can go into some pretty good items. Collector, Yomu's last batch was really good. Eclipse has always been like a pretty good item. Duskblade is sometimes good for some people. Umbral was sometimes like OP and so on. So you usually have at least one item that's pretty good after this if you can use it. Practicality of build, very practical, like no real issue. You're buying this, you're buying the next items, the build paths are all good, the strength is all good. When you buy this item, you're good, you're scaling well. When you buy the next item, you power spike well. When you buy the next item, it also scales with other items well. No real issues, right? And the last point that I have really about items is practicality of impact, where how realistic is the item to be used. So for example, something could be really amazing, like, I don't know, Kraken or something. Like DPS wise, it could be amazing. Like, I don't know, Kraken or Storm Razor if you proc it every single time, or I don't know. What item? Like Essence Tree where you proc it on cooldown every time, or like Brawler's Claw, you proc it on cooldown every time. I don't know. Just think of your own example, whatever you want, right? Let's say Duskblade even. You go invulnerable every time and you dodge a shit ton of damage. But is this really practical, and is it realistic in real fights and so on? And the answer is oftentimes no. Like, buying a lot of CTR might give you a lot of DPS, and if you buy a lot of attack speed, you might be able to do a lot of DPS to a target dummy or something. But you're not really playing against target dummies when you play the game, so not so practical. This is also where Dirk is an amazing item, because you're getting burst rather than getting DPS or something, so it's really practical as well when you're trying to impact the game. So this is kind of a way to gauge which items are good, and which items are going to be very useful and which are not. So with these standards, we can say something like Serrated Dirk is very useful, right? Noon Quiver, very useful, right? A very good item. Something like Static Shiv has some issues then, because what issues does Static Shiv have, and why do people avoid buying it? I think the item is actually not as bad as I said before. I think it's actually like okay, especially on some champs, it's like pretty okay. The problem mainly is that this thing is an AP ratio passive for some reason instead of being 80 or something, so quite annoying on that. But if we look at it, if we just use our 5 criteria that we used at the moment, so you have them on screen now, right? Do with that as you will. So power at completion, okay, we're fine-ish. We're getting the gold that we spent. We're getting a passive that gives us some kind of value, so not too bad. Power during building, perfectly reasonable. Good component, right? No real issues, okay. Scaling after completion, problematic because AP ratio for some reason, so this thing gets completely outscaled, the passive. It's still fine, it still does something, but it just doesn't scale into anything, while other items passives do scale into something. Practicality of the build is pretty fine, not really too much of an issue. And practicality of the impact is a bit problematic because we're trying to proc this and have it proc on everyone to actually get value out of this, or to make it clear the wave. But the problem with this is that I'm not sure if it's still like this because they buffed the damage a bit, but on the last patch, the way it worked is that usually the minions would end up like 1/3 HP or 1/5 HP or something, and it wouldn't actually finish off the minion wave. And because it wouldn't finish off the minion wave, you would need to instantly walk up and actually finish off the minion wave with your own spells somehow. Which means that while you did achieve something by buying the item, you didn't achieve that much, which was quite annoying. At the same time, if you were trying to proc this on a lot of enemies, it could also be quite difficult to always proc it on everyone. So, not that practical. But this should also tell you why something like Evelynn buys the items that she does buy, right? So, all that I talked about in this video has to be related to a champion specific case, right? So you're looking at your champion and you figure out, okay, so my champion has a very high AP ratio here. My champion has a pretty good AP ratio here. My champion has a very good AP ratio here. In the end, this ends up being an AP ratio above 4. And that means that for every point of AP I have, I get 4 damage or more. Hero Wars. I will try that game. They're spamming me with ads. I will try it. So since you're getting a value of 4 times on every point of AP, you're gonna want the most AP heavy items you can buy, right? So Magi's Travelance, instantly, I want that. Because you have a lot of damage, right? And you also have percentage HP damage, you're gonna want Pen. because you have a lot of base damage here, you have a lot of percentage HP damage here. This makes sense for Pen. And because you have this stuff, you want flat Pen as well. So Rocket Belt makes sense, and Void Staff makes sense for you, right? And we already arrived at 4 of the items that we want on our champion. Now, because we have a very high AP ratio and stuff, we want the items to give us the most AP, right? And because we're getting a lot of AP, getting a little bit of extra AP from an item like Shadow Flame doesn't really add up compared to getting something that scales with AP as well, because something like Lich Bane will scale off the build that we're buying, right? So 50% of AP, that means we're getting an extra 50% AP ratio here, right? An extra 50% AP ratio when we're hard stacking AP is pretty good. Usually you buy this item on champions that don't have a lot of AP ratios, mostly because you want to give them an extra AP ratio in itself. But the thing is, this item just ends up synergizing with our champ, because when we buy like 4 or 5 items, we already bought so much AP that we might as well just buy another AP ratio, because it's going to make us scale even harder. At the same time, because we have so much damage, but we're locked into animations, stuff like Banshees becomes really good, right? You can use this reasoning for most champs though. So for example, like Lucian, what does Lucian really want? Lucian's a champion I quite enjoy, so I'll really quickly go over him as well. So he has pretty good AD ratio here, pretty good AD ratio here, pretty good AD ratio here, right? That's pretty good. I would say that's pretty fucking good, no? That's minion damage though, so let's look at this. Okay, and this is total damage, right? Either way, these both really good. Okay, so we have a really high AD ratio, so AD really good. Okay, we also scale with crit chance here, so maybe we want to get some crit chance here. Okay, so we want AD and crit chance at the moment. It looks like we're using our spells a lot, and we have decent cooldowns. Our cooldown gets reduced here by auto-attacking, right? So maybe some cooldown reduction could make us use spells more often and also have more impact with that. We would also have it synergize with our high AD ratios on the spells, because if we just use our auto-attacks have an AD ratio of 100%, and when you crit, they have a higher AD ratio, I don't know, 175%, right? Or if you buy IE, it's like 210, I guess, or something like that. I don't know. But either way, if I buy attack speed, then I'm amplifying that AD ratio, sort of. You can think of attack speed as a cooldown reduction for ADCs. So does on Lucian, attack speed make more sense or cooldown reduction? In this case, I would say it's cooldown reduction. That's why people prioritize it, right? But at the same time, having some attack speed is pretty good because it speeds up your combo. That's why people buy some attack speed from this champ. So for example, like Rapid Fire or something, it gives him range, it gives him some attack speed. It's just good for him, right? Because you also have to think about champion ranges and whatever else. And if we think about too many things, it becomes a bit too complicated. But for now, we can just simply think about the items the way that I described, and the rest of the numbers that you don't really know or whatever, if you're not sure if the items add up, then you can always go into practice tool and add some MR and armor and HP to a target dummy and try some example combos, and you will see how it works out on your champion. Either way, if you enjoyed the video or if this helped you in any way, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.